Hey everybody, thanks so much for being with us. I've got Ted Gross from Princeton University. Ted, thanks again for being with us today.
My pleasure, Lee.
And just a couple of quick housekeeping things, folks. We are recording the session today, so you'll have the replay up in a few days. And also, we're not doing Q&A during this session because we want to get as much out of Ted as we can. But if you'd like, you can enter any questions right below the video window. And Ted and I will try to do our best to follow up with those after. So we're just going to jump right in. So, these guys at Princeton, like you, Ted, you are very smart. So I think I'll give you the hardest question to begin today. So imagine, well, you don't actually have to imagine this. Actually, in Princeton, there is a Starbucks. And around the corner from that Starbucks, there happens to be a psychic. This is real. You guys can all go look it up on Google Maps, but Ted knows this. And one day, after picking up your coffee, you decide on a whim to venture in and get a tarot card reading. And things are going well, but then suddenly you draw the devil card. And the psychic says, one day you will have to make a great sacrifice, Ted. So what is the most valuable skill you have when it comes to analytics, and what would it mean for you to lose it?
Wow, that is a pretty tough question, Lee. I thought you were going to ask me, what's my name? So, well, I've got almost 50 years of work experience, which kind of is a scary thought. And about a third of that time I spent on the customer side. I was a college admissions director. I worked in institutional research. And so, although, my most recent 20 years at Princeton have essentially been on the technical side, I did spend a lot of time on the customer side. And so I think the skill that I've got, the most valuable skill that I have, is being able to see questions, issues, problems from both sides of the computer. A lot of times the technical people get overwhelmed with trying to answer the question of how to do something, and the customer is still at trying to figure out what needs to be done. And so sometimes you get a disconnect. And I find that because I've spent such a long time in both areas, that I can kind of bridge the gap, and I can put into semi-technical terms what the customers are saying and vice versa. But the thing that's kind of amazing is that I still, after so many years of work, don't consider myself very technical. But I find myself lapsing into technobabble. And I realize that if I'm doing that my technical staff is also doing it. And, when my customers start getting this glazed look in their eye, I know I've really crossed the line. So that's the skill that I think is most valuable. And the easy answer to the second part of your question, if I didn't have that skill, honestly, I think I'd be a total and dismal failure. Because I believe that the main value that I add to any project is that ability. And without that, I don't want to say I'm totally useless, but I think my value is significantly diminished.
So I feel a bit the same as what you described, because I stumbled into that, I think, as well, where I started off more on the technical side of the world and then became more on the business side, and always felt that having both of those viewpoints is helpful, not only just for the straightforward ability to do what you described, but I think credibility with people, right? Where they feel like you get what their concerns are.
Yeah.
Because they know that you've been there and you can express it back in their terms. But so let's just play that out though. So I definitely think that is a key skill. So how do people, say, who maybe are more on the technical side, because they might lapse into that technobabble, very sophisticated thing. How does somebody on that side of the world build that skill?
Well, I think the skill, when you boil all the other stuff away, really comes down to being an active listener. I've noticed both in this current job and in other jobs where I've got technical people working for me, immediately they want to try to solve the problem. And a lot of times the customer hasn't clearly articulated exactly what the problem is or what it is that they want. And so, I would suggest, whether you count to 10, force yourself to kind of parrot back to the customer what they said, instead of just jumping into a technical solution. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that, and I can't tell you how many times I've done that. So
if you put I think those are good, even simple tips that people could follow. Have you done anything with your team over this last 20 years where you either give them specific coaching or you have team meetings to help them with those, or because you probably see it in your meetings with them and realize that person or persons need to build some of that ability?
That's a really good question. I try to do this stuff by example. The last thing I want to do is in a meeting with our business partners to turn to one of my technical people and say, "You're not listening." Mm-hmm. So a lot of times what I'll do is I will kind of display the process and give back to the customer what I think they were talking about. And then after the fact, we can take it offline. I do have one other, I've been teaching a course at a number of schools in information systems. And all the students that I have are either non-technical or semi-technical. And because I've been doing it for so long, the first night of class, I tell them, we're going to focus primarily on the what and not the how, because the how is going to change. Mm-hmm. The technology is going to change. And so, I give them a problem and they immediately try to give me a technical solution. And I say, slow down. What's the problem? What are they trying to accomplish? What is this system supposed to be doing? So that's pretty much how I've tried to mold or
I think some of those kind of questions are good because it's something that people can use if they're not really sure where to start. I always have to kind of close on this one because I've kind of lived this, where I'll say, if you could kind of clear away all the problems that you think you would have to get this done, in the end, what is it that you are going to be able to do with this?
Yeah.
You can also imagine it like, the other thing you could do is a fun one is to say, imagine that you were going to buy this on Amazon and you were reading the product description. What would you be looking for?
Yep,
right?
exactly.
It kind of puts it in that real term.
Yeah, just let me say one last thing on this. This is a problem when people are building, say, transactional systems, but it becomes even more acute with analytic solutions because by its very nature, analytics are it's an ongoing process. So it's very unusual. It's very rare when people know exactly what they want. They come and they say, I'd like to understand this. And then we say, well, do you have a specific set of questions that you need to have answered? And kind of work our way backwards and forwards that way. So,
yeah, it's more exploratory, and
it is.
Then I need if X happens, then do Y kind of thing.
You got it.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, good. So you got through the gauntlet. That was the hardest one. So easy street from here.
Can I go now?
Of course not. All right. So let's go. I'll go maybe with the one that I think is the easiest. Now, you've worked in lots of different roles, but certainly in analytics for a long time. And I'm guessing you've seen a lot of things, I would say, that work in doing these kinds of jobs, and a lot of things that don't work. And I know from our conversations over the years that you work with a lot of big, complex projects. And but you probably also within that come across probably some small changes that people can do that make a big impact on their work versus just say we have to do this massive project that can make change. So is there anything that you can think about, whether that you've done or that you've kind of come across with your team, that are just small changes that you can apply to how people work? Because I want people to think about this for themselves, the people listening to this say, oh, I could do something like that. I could take it and put it into place quickly without running into politics and all this other roadblocks that they might imagine.
Sure. Well, I'm not going to. The pearls of wisdom on this one are pretty common. There's the phrase, you can't boil the ocean. And so a lot of times people just get intimidated because they think that they've got to produce a final product immediately. So what I found to be very, very helpful, and I guess it's just a refined version of doing some prototyping. Forget all the bells and whistles. Forget all the bells and whistles. Just try to do a small bit of what you think a final project might look like. Get it down, look at it, test it, fix it, do it, test it, fix it. Don't get paralyzed by being overwhelmed. And I think what people appreciate is that as soon as they actually build something, it kind of opens up the world to them. Because a lot of times you don't really know where you're going. You don't know what all the connections are. But just get something down. I mean, I've seen people prototype dashboards in a day. And it's a good way for them to get familiar with the technology. But it's even a better way for them to get familiar with the environment, the business problems, the data, because so many times, I think you can almost teach anybody to use one of the BI tools that are available for analytics. I've seen people with no background at all in a day become competent. It's really the data that's the hard part. And so by doing something very quickly, you get your hands on the data, you see where all the connections are, and that just seems to open up an endless amount of possibilities.
Yeah, I think it's the other side of the boil of the ocean is that perfect is the enemy of done.
Yeah, right.
Where people think, and it's especially true when you talk about data, because you're like, oh, we need all the data. The data has to be perfect, right? And first of all, you never have all the data, so that idea is is kind of flawed. But to your point, if you start working with it and building some simple ideas out, it forces your brain to start thinking about the use of it versus just the data being kind of this inanimate thing now starting to come to light. And it actually helps, I think, identify potential gaps or problems in the data, because you say, well, what about this? And someone might say, well, we don't have it, we don't have it in that form. And before you get too far down the line in building out this whole solution and then hit the wall and now it's become a huge issue, you can identify some of these things that might have been harder to know if you just kind of keep them on paper and don't really work with them.
Yeah, the flip side of that, and again, I'm being perfectly honest here, is that so many times little prototypes wind up being the actual final solution. And sometimes that's a problem also, because it was so easy to build something very quickly. And it was never meant to be a final product, that other things start interfering. You never get the time to complete what you've got. And so you've got all these half-done prototypes. So you got to be real careful.
So how do you deal with that, though? It does sound like a real problem.
It is a real problem. And, very few of us have the luxury, working in this kind of business, to choose the problems that we want to solve. And so a lot of times a prototype becomes the production because we've got other things to do. So I guess, the best thing to do is just to make sure that you work closely with your customers and they understand that it's just like part one of maybe a 10-part series. Right. So, again,
maybe you should just put bugs in the prototype.
Yeah, right.
On purpose, so that it's flawed. You say it's not done. It's just,
or just write code that self-destructs after a week.
Right, exactly. Just kind of, if you know that that's where it's going, you can get ahead of that thinking. And I get that. That's always been a concern that I've seen out there, is now everything looks so good, and it's easy to do. So you come back in a day and people are, wow, they might have been used to someone saying that could be weak, right? I have to get in the data and I have to do these things, and right, and now it's so straightforward. Sometimes you could just do it right there with someone.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, that's good enough, right? And it's really not.
Of course.
And
well, this is more problematic today than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, especially with visual analytics, because it really is incredibly simple in a relatively short time to produce something that really looks great, but doesn't really have the substance that you want your final product to have.
So would you say that, kind of closing this question out, it's worth the risk of using those kinds of prototypes to move faster and engage the customer better, even going back to the first question about being able to question them and be a good listener to get that part rolling?
Yeah.
Versus the risk of, say, where they might say, you have these half-done things.
Yeah, I think it's worth the risk, and humans are much more comfortable reacting and responding to something that exists than something that they just talk about. So a great way to get people fully engaged in refocusing their business questions is to just give them something very quickly. So I think it's worth the risk. Yep.
Cool. Well, hopefully everybody here will be able to take a little bit of that vibe and maybe push themselves to do that. So I think actually that leads very well into the last question.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
Can I just
getting
interrupt you
talking
for
about
1 second?
customers, I know.
Lee, can I just tell you one thing?
Yeah.
Um, you know, sometimes you have to don't do what I say. No, I'm sorry. Don't do what I do what I say. I am terrible, absolutely terrible about writing a report really quickly and never getting rid of it.
Hmm.
You know, and I look, so my staff says, you know, we have to upgrade the software. Do you still need these 10 reports? We saw that you created them, you cloned them over and over again, and you never cleaned up after yourself. I said, yeah, well, I answered the question really quickly. I forgot. So we all fall in this trap, I'm sure.
The graveyard of digital remains.
Yeah, I'm a terrible offender of that. So.
Big time. Well, if that's your worst offense, then not so bad.
Not so bad.
And good that your team calls you out on it as well.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. They would say, well, you know, we're trying to clean up because we're upgrading the software. Do you really need those 37 reports that all say the same thing? So it's okay.
Yeah, so that's good. And it's good practice that they're doing that.
Yep.
As well. All right, so let's kind of go for wrapping up and keeping ourselves honest on the time. So I know that you guys also have a very diverse customer base that you work with because you're really helping all of the different parts of the university. And so that clearly poses some challenges. And one of the things I believe is, and you mentioned upgrading the software. I think really for organizations to get to that next level around analytics, it's not as much about the software anymore. The software does crazy, amazing stuff already. Whether it's the visual side or the analytics capabilities that it's bringing to us. That to get to that next level, it's really more about people and culture and how they work together, and maybe even at the level of people changing their own behavior. Not even just building the skills and some of the things we talked about, but their real behavior. And that's hard, right? Change is hard. So can you think about a time when you had to push past your comfort zone, or maybe even someone on your team had to help you, had to help them push past their comfort zone, and why do you think it was so hard to do that?
Well, I actually think this is the hardest of the three questions, not the easiest.
I didn't do it on purpose.
That's okay.
It wasn't a trick.
Well, you know, I spent about 25 years, either primarily or incidentally, doing high-level SPSS and SAS programming. You know, I had to learn how to, program in SAS on a mainframe when I had to write my dissertation. So my whole world is based on those high-level statistical programming tools. And I thought it would be an easy transition to visual analytics, okay? And so, when we got some of these tools, I started playing around with them myself and produced absolute garbage, okay? And
when you say garbage, what do you mean?
I'm not very visual. I don't have great visual acuity. Okay. I understand data and I understand statistics. But I noticed that, when I was building some bar graphs or pie charts or whatever the visual tool was, they really weren't very good, okay? And so what was difficult for me was to accept the fact that I just wasn't real good. And I let my staff do it, okay? I just trusted them. So I was moving beyond my comfort level of saying, well, I'm the statistician. I can do this stuff. and saying to them, you do it much, much better than I do. And I have one little anecdote which I think illustrates this. A couple of years ago, I did a demonstration for about 150 staff at Princeton. I forget what the topic was. And, my group is called the Center for Data Analytics and Reporting. And we use Tableau, we use Cognos. So a lot of visual stuff. And I had about 20 slides, and they were all text. And at the end of the presentation, somebody stood up and said, that was really interesting, but you think you could have put in a couple of visuals? And I said to myself, wow, I really need to do this, and I need to delegate that to my staff because I know my limitations. So
do you think that's interesting? Thanks for sharing that, because it could be pretty revealing. So do you think that was just an oversight, or do you think subconsciously you avoided it and just kind of went with it?
I think my comfort level is verbiage, okay? And even though, we've got all these tools, I think I might have had one slide that had it was a funny slide that I found someplace. It wasn't even anything that I had built. I just trend towards, text and speaking. I have some incredibly talented staff who are significantly more visual. And so when we need something where visualization is needed, I don't even try. I just say, you do it. Let me see what you've done. Let me make sure that I understand it. Here are maybe a couple of minor suggestions, but I try not to micromanage that process. Yeah.
You bring up a really interesting point within that, beyond just the fact of your kind of self-realization. And I think this is fairly widespread in that someone gave you the software, right? And there's this burden of expectation that for some reason you're supposed to be good at visual and putting it together, right? It's not stated, but it's there. And that's unfair to everybody, because just like everything else, that's something that could be taught. I mean, that's something I deal with all the time with my customers, and saying, look, it's a new kind of language. Whether people, you hear terms like, data literacy, information as a second language is a term that Valerie Logan from Gartner had created, and it drives home that there is something to be learned here, that there's something underlying. It's not just about clicking the software to make it effective. And that's something that we have to overcome, I think, long term, for people to get good at this. And as data becomes more available to people on an everyday basis, right? Everybody in the company, it's trending that way, right? This idea is, look, everybody should be able to have access to at least some kind of data beyond the Excel spreadsheets that maybe they have today, right? Bigger and more robust data, but you also have to give them some skills to be able to use that again. Like, they're not analysts.
Right.
They might not even be analytical, which are two completely separate things, right? Some of that is skills, and some of that is just people got it or don't got it, in my opinion.
Well, I got to tell you that if I tried to build a dashboard and submit it to you, you would give me an F-.
Oh my goodness. I'd give you a little slack, maybe.
Gentlemen, C. I wouldn't deserve it.
Well, but again, that's the point, right? It's not necessary that you should expect it, that you should be able to come in off the bat and say, look, I'm giving you a B, an A plus, right, performance, because you haven't had the luxury of getting an education behind it. Just like learning English language, it's the same thing. I don't think people look at it, they just look at it as technology. And I think when they look at it more from, this is just my opinion, from a communication view, it can really change how you think about what your organization may mean. And, and maybe say, look, Ted, we're not even going to give it, we're not even going to give it to you, right? Because maybe you say, look, I'm not a visual person. So why give it to me? Look, I like to write, I like to speak, but this is not the way I operate, it's not how I communicate, and so why give it to me, right? I mean, it's just not how I don't think we're sophisticated enough in a lot of ways as organizations to think about it in that perspective. It's just, here it is. So
yeah, I think it's no more better stated than the fact that, for the past couple of years, people on campus have said, we need to do more with analytics. And when you really question them about it, they're not quite sure what analytics are. We can give them all the tools because they pretty much do stuff themselves. And most of the analytics that people are doing now, at Princeton at least, are primarily descriptive. We're not doing much predictive or prescriptive analytics. And that's less to do with the technology and more to do with the fact that people just haven't completely embraced that analytic perspective.
Yeah.
So
yeah, makes sense.
I think I've pontificated enough here.
No, but that's what this is for. I mean, we're trying to get at, these are some real problems that are not, I don't think, unique in most places, especially when it revolves around people, right? It's just, they're just going to be common situations that we're all in, and it doesn't matter if it's Princeton, it doesn't matter if it's Verizon or whatever company it happens to be. So this is great. I think we're right at our mark, so perfect. Thanks for such great, I really feel the candidness coming from you and the discussion, and I appreciate that, and I'm sure everybody that listening appreciates that too. And thanks so much for your time. And folks, again, we'll have the replay of this up, and make sure that you're checking out the other sessions we've got coming up in the next few weeks. So long. Thanks,
Lee. Take care.
So long.